Hello everyone, we continue our series about our women, males between the age of 13 and 20, namely those that didn't give the maxtzit, השקל, the half shekel every year, obligated in davening Musaf. The two assumptions that would actually exempt them is A, Musaf is only and solely in place of the sacrifice, nothing added to it, and B, those that did not give the maxtzit השקל, namely women, perhaps kids between the age of 13 and 20, had nothing to do with the communal sacrifice. If you didn't give money towards it, it had nothing to do with you. Put those two assumptions together, maybe they would be exempt from Musaf. And today we're going to see the views that say no, because they obviously disagree with one of these two assumptions. Let's start with Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, one of the greatest poskim of the end of the 19th century in Lithuania, chief rabbi of Kovna, comes along and says, Kohanim v'Leviyim v'Ktanim pchutim miben esrim yipatru Musaf? Are you actually going to contemplate that they're not obligated in Musaf? And even if you want to say, no, kids between 13 and 20 do give. Why? Because eventually they can give, either because they can give at the age of 13 if they so choose, or eventually they will at the age of 20, so somehow they're part of it. According to one day, Kohanim and Leviim also didn't give maxtzit shekel. You want to say before Musaf, all Kohanim Leviim, you can leave shul now, all kids between the age of 13 and 20? Ela al korchenu muchach, tein tfilat Musaf tadu b'shkalim, v'nashim chayavot. V'chein muchach mistimat aposkim, v'nashim chayavot b'tfilah, v'lo chilkul ben Musaf d'shari tfilot. And therefore, Rav Yitzchak Elchanan says, I disagree with the assumption. Musaf is not dependent upon who gave maxtzit shekel. It's a prayer service, it's in the siddur, and everyone is obligated to daven it on the days that a Musaf was brought in the Beis HaMikdash. Continuing the school of thought, the Shut Beit Yitzchak of Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes, also of the 19th century, as I mentioned, wrote one of the first shuvas about electricity in Shabbos, comes along and says that the whole idea of exempting them is very strange, because accordingly, the Kohanim would be exempt, anyone between the age of 13 and 20 would be exempt, and ultimately he doesn't understand how that could be, because we are making an assumption that if you don't give maxtzit shekel, you have nothing to do with that korban. He says, what do you mean? On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, the representative of all the Jewish people, would bring various sacrifices on behalf of the Jewish people. Are you going to say that he only brought it on behalf of those that contributed to the maxtzit shekel? In his words, Im kain, nashim b'mei yitkapru, betumat mikdash kodoshavu v'yom kippurim. How exactly do they get their atonement on Yom Kippur, or their atonement of going into the Beis HaMikdash in a state of impurity, which one of the clothing of the Kohen Gadol would actually affect a kapara, an atonement for? Are you telling me that he's not the representative of all the Jewish people when he goes in on Yom Kippur? And therefore says Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes, Vaday yesh lahem kapara, of course they're part of it. And this whole idea doesn't make sense. In other words, the assumption that only those that gave to the fund are part of what the fund does and affects is wrong. Even those that didn't give to the fund, if they're part of the Jewish people, it affects them, and therefore today it follows that since we don't have a Kohen Gadol and we don't have Korbanot, even those that didn't give the maxtzit shekel still get the benefit, quote-unquote, of the communal sacrifices. The Shut Amudei Or continues this thinking of Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes, and indeed says, I have a proof for you. The Gemara in Sukkah talks about what the itinerary of Sukkot looked like when there was a Beis HaMikdash with the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and basically says they barely slept. And amongst the things it says there, it says in the name of Rav Yoshua ben Chanina that Misham Litfilat HaMusafin, from here we went to daven Musaf. He was a Levi. A Levi is not obligated in maxtzit shekel, according to one point of view, and therefore don't infer that Levim are not obligated in Musaf because they didn't give the maxatzit shekel. In other words, one is not dependent on the other, and quite frankly, mitkaprim ayu gam hem b'chol korbanot hatzibur. They were part and parcel of the Jewish people, and therefore they get the benefit of the communal sacrifices. The Shut Shaul Meshiv, Rav Shaul Natanzon, comes along and says that the assumption that Musaf is in place of the korban is not an exact equation. In his words, shezer rak lezecher shel korban hamusaf, v'hamusaf ba gam aleihem kamo al anashim. When you say it's in place of, it's not equal, rather in place of. So when we say the table's like the dining room table is like a mizbeach, no one in their right mind would say, well, when you build a dining room table, you have to build it according to the measurements of the mizbeach. And you can only use the tools that are kosher to build a mizbeach. It's like a mizbeach, but not exactly. Same thing with Musaf. It's in like when we used to bring the sacrifice, so today we verbally talk about it, but it's not exact. And therefore, because it's just a zecher, we don't exactly have to be pedantic. And everyone's obligated in it, very much like Korech on Pesach. We do a zecher lemigdash kehillel, the way Hillel used to eat, but Hillel used to eat it with a piece of meat, maror and matzah. We only eat it with maror and matzah, because it's just a zecher. So as you can see, many obligated women, and of course children between the age of 13 and 20, and obviously Kohanim and Leviim and Musaf. And the question is, what's at the crux of it? So it comes along the Magen Giborim, which I always like learning because it was written in unison between Rav Mordechai Zev Ettinger and the Shaul Meshiv we mentioned, Rav Shaul Natanzon. We're talking about the 19th century. They wrote the Perush on the Shulchan Aruch, and he said maybe this is all based on a Yerushalmi. There's a Yerushalmi that says that Musaf used to consist of 18 blessings like our Shmoneh Esrei during the week. And in the middle, they used to mention, and yes, we used to bring the Korban Musaf, and these are the Korbanot they used to bring. In other words, it was a weekday Shmoneh Esrei with an insertion of what sacrifices they used to bring. Well, if that's the case, he says, then obviously it was a Musaf comprised of two things, sacrifices and rachmei, and asking mercy of God via those 13 blessings of petition. As such, you can understand why nowhere do we find that it says women are exempt, because they weren't exempt. It has rachmei. Since women are as obligated as men when there's a prayer of rachmei, they were obligated in Musaf. The fact that today we only have 7 blessings, that doesn't change the initial obligation of women in Musaf. So to sum up, many say that these two assumptions, A, Musaf is only about sacrifices, and B, those that didn't give money to the maxatzit shekel are not obligated in talking about sacrifices, is an equation that's not correct totally. Either because even those that didn't give to the maxatzit shekel were part of the sacrificial service in some way or another, or maybe there was an additional added rachmei to the Musaf once upon a time. Whatever it might be, this two assumptions does not exempt women Musaf, and therefore they are as obligated in Musaf as men above the age of 20.